What if we're built to give back so we don't burn down the libraries of our wisdom and values? I'd like to welcome Deborah Heiser to the Design Your Legacy podcast this lovely Friday. Welcome, Deborah.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It is my pleasure to host you. And I know that you are aware of the bridge between mentorship and legacy. So let's jump off and talk about what is mentorship, what makes a good mentor. What say you?
Oh, wow. There's a lot here. So I'm excited to talk about this. Most people don't realize that we're built to give back. So legacies are something that we're built internally to do, just like walk and talk. It happens to be part of our emotional development as we grow older. So the three ways that we can give back are mentoring, philanthropy, and volunteering. And when people think of legacy, they often think of finances and things, the sort of tangible things that we can think about. But one of the most powerful ways that we can leave a legacy or that we can give back in a way that our memory is retained is through giving back through mentorship, which includes our values. If you think of any tradition in your family or your household, if you had Thanksgiving dinner, what's at the table? If you have a religious holiday, what are those traditions that you have? We know that religion is passed down for centuries, and our values are part of that and our culture. And that's passed down through mentorship. So it's one of the strongest forms of legacy that we can leave. And what we know is that in midlife, it's the point where we're built to do this.
Yeah, absolutely. I know that you spoke about that at age 50, there's a fork in the road regarding we've realized we've checked the boxes and we ask ourselves, now what? It's also a moment where, and I know you're going to probably speak about the Scrooge Ebenezer influence in a moment, that component, that pillar. But I just wanted to go back for a moment because you touched upon human capital. And when it comes to family businesses and family offices, human capital is one of those areas that people know is incredibly valuable. And yet, a lot of times, people don't know where to start. And I just wondered, and I'm going to zig and zag a little bit, but when you sit down with an individual, how do you take inventory with them when it comes to mentoring? Is it, do you offer this idea of what their strengths are, or do you leave that ball in their court?
So, really, I believe that mentorship is driven by the mentor. It is not driven by the mentee. Most of us think that we hear, go find yourself a mentor, and they're supposed to pull themselves up with this nameless, faceless individual. Mentorship should have a name and a face to the mentor. And so when I sit down with someone, I say, what is it that you would like people to think of you when your name is on their lips? What do you want them to think about you? And that could be your family, that could be friends, it could be anything. What is it that you want to be known for? And it's surprising that some of the most well-known individuals in their field of work, that's not what they want to have as their memory. Most people do want to be able to leave some financial legacy behind. That's men and women alike. But that isn't the main thing. Most of the time, it's a value that they hold, and that might be family. That the family remain intact, that the family all hold similar values. So I try to find out what is it that's most important to each individual that I'm talking with, so that we can look to get that legacy out there.
Yeah, that's brilliant. What would you say, and again, I'm just laying the foundational groundwork, what would you say is mentorship? And then what is it not in the distinction?
Oh, okay. Sure. So mentorship isn't just an interaction. It starts with generativity, which is an emotional developmental milestone that we hit in midlife. So generativity is when we care for someone without expecting anything in return. Most of us can think of that when we think of our children, that, they cry in the middle of the night when they're babies, but we just care about them. We're not expecting them to do anything for us. Well, that expands way beyond that. We have care for others all throughout our lives where we're not expecting anything in return, and that is generativity. And that kicks in midlife. And so we need to have that component because the mentor needs to want to give back to somebody without them paying them or doing anything else. They have to just want to do this. The second thing is it has to be intrinsically motivated. So in this case, it has to be somebody wanting to do it without pay, recognition, or an award. They could do this and no one will ever know and they'll still be satisfied. And an example of this is If you've ever gone to volunteer in a soup kitchen, you usually feel really great afterwards. This is something that people say, wow, I love this. I will do this every year. I'll do this regularly. But if you ask that same person to volunteer their time at Starbucks, giving out food and beverage to hungry, thirsty people, they will say no. And that's because that's an extrinsic motivator. And it doesn't give us that same feeling. You don't see a person leaving work every day saying, wow, I feel terrific. It's because their motivator is something other than intrinsic. The next thing is a meaningful connection. We have to be really connected with our mentor and mentee. Both of them have to be connected. So if you don't like the person that you're mentoring, you're not going to be a good mentor. And a lot of people put a big emphasis on matching mentors, and they don't put an emphasis on how the person feels about that person. But just like you can meet 10 different people, and maybe one is somebody that you really say, wow, I like hanging out with this person. This is going to be a friend. It's not a failure with the other nine. It's that, that you didn't become friends with. It's that you really want to make sure that you're with somebody that you really resonate with. And the next one is a goal. You have to have a goal, right? Otherwise, you're just chit-chatting. And finally, you need trust. If you don't trust that your mentee is going to accept your information that you're giving them, the knowledge, the skills, the value, if you think that you're just putting it out there and someone is not going to do anything with it, that's not going to be a good mentoring relationship. Likewise, if you think that the mentee is going to steal your ideas, maybe they're trying to surpass you. If you think that that's happening, that's not a good mentoring relationship. And similarly, these both work for mentor and mentee. If you see a mentee who has, they don't trust that they can get mentorship from their boss because they think if I say something to my boss, they're not going to give me a promotion, that I can't show my vulnerabilities. So all of these five things are what's really necessary for both mentors and mentees to engage in mentorship. And when we see something that looks like a relationship that's working for somebody that's not, that's the example of Ebenezer Scrooge you brought up. He was a self-made guy. He lived in a mansion. He had servants taking care of all of his needs. This is what a lot of us, when we're young, we say, this is what I want. But he was
That's what the
miserable.
definition of success is.
Yes,
Yes.
but he was miserable. So it wasn't until he gave back that he started to feel joy. And that's exactly how mentorship works. And that's how it works with leaving a legacy that matters to you, is
Yeah,
when you take it in.
yeah, I think thank you for explaining that for the context of the listeners and the viewers and so forth. I thought it was so interesting in your TEDx talk. You mentioned that sometimes people can be afraid of aging. They can become afraid of growing older. And you showed this chart of maybe somebody is at their peak at 40 and then there's the decline to 80. And yet the other flip side, and that's the front side of the hand, then the back side of the hand, is that there's this opportunity for emotional growth. If we can stack our experiences and stack our wisdom and life lessons and our best practices. And I think that's the piece that people need to lean into these days.
Absolutely. I always used to joke that I was like a dud at cocktail parties because as soon as someone would find out I was an aging specialist, they'd run away or find someone else to talk to. And that's because most of us fear the physical aging process. Everyone says, I want to live a long, full life. But when they really think about it, there's fear in that because they expect to lead a life of being decrepit and frail and full of wrinkles and a sort of an unwanted in many ways.
A
And
burden.
that's because of that trajectory where we have the steep incline and then the slow, steady decline. No one says, I want to grow up and decline. So what most people don't talk about that's been studied for more than 75 years is our emotional development and what goes into that. We can expect to be happier in our 50s than we were in our 20s. Our emotional um, our emotional development only increases, it does not decline. So you can expect at 80 or 90 to be happier as you get older. And part of that is because it's almost like a tree. The seed is planted, and then as that develops, you don't get the fruit bearing until it's much older. It's at the end. And that fruit, say it's apple, is our wisdom that we're giving back to others. And that's where we're really feeling like we're fulfilled and happy. And that's where our legacy kicks in. And we say, wow, I mattered in this world. My footprint meant something. The people that I care about mean something to me. And so if we are able to look at our emotional development instead of our physical development, we will be able to tap into all that we want our legacy to be by the time we're 90 and 100.
Yes, we need to tell that to Madison Avenue.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, I thought it was a brilliant. You had mentioned that we have this opportunity to become more joyful as we get older. It's better to give to than to receive. But somebody, I think, needs to realize that if they look internally, that's where the gold is. It's
It,
not necessarily the flash and all of that commercial
yeah,
image that gets portrayed, which can oftentimes be empty. Like when you referred to Scrooge, he got to the point you had said he was siloed, and without the deeper, more meaningful relationships, it was maybe not everything that he thought it would be in the grass being greener on the other side.
absolutely. When we're thinking of legacy, we're thinking of giving something to someone else to hold on to and to carry. And if you are siloed, as you just mentioned, or you don't have those connections, it's impossible to have a legacy. You can put your name up on a building, but who's going to remember who you were? It's just a name then. You want to have meaning attached to your name. You want to have meaning attached to whatever else you had. Otherwise, we're just burning down, as I mentioned before, libraries of knowledge, skills, values, all of that. It just disappears with a person at the end of their life. So that's why if we can attach emotion to legacy and start that in midlife, we have the ability to choose to whom and how many we're giving back to. And that's really powerful.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the power of love always exceeds ego, but yet sometimes people who have experienced success can stay trapped in ego because it's like,
Yeah.
yeah, a little vulnerable even to step out to be, uh, generous with a mentee. Yeah. So, in the context of family businesses, how can we bring generations together to solve challenges?
Well, part of it is that if you are someone who has become the expert in the family at your business, you're the person running it. It's time by the time you're in midlife to start to think of how do you want this to look? Because if you think of generational wealth, by the third generation, it's often gone. And so you want to make sure that if you want lasting legacy that's financial, how can you set that up so that your legacy has meaning to the next generation? If they're just holding a job or if they're just holding something that you have, that it always is like a leaky bucket. A lot of what is being held there is lost, and then that leaky bucket becomes less and less. So you want to make sure that you're getting your values. What is it that was made it passionate for you, that made it so that you really loved it, and that can be translated to the next generation? The passion that we hold that's value related, a lot of people think, just concentrate on the tangibles. But I just want to go back to some of the values that most of us understand. If you go to a family gathering or you have something that is so meaningful to you, you can remember the smells. You can remember how it's supposed to look. Every Thanksgiving, I create my whole holiday meal based on the cards that my grandmother, who's long gone, hand wrote with every recipe. If I leave any of that out, the whole family feels like there's something missing or wrong. Those are the values that we always take for granted, but those are what can be translated into business. So, what is the value that you feel? Why is your business so important to you? Why does it matter? And that can be translated into the next generation and taught so that they can translate it to the next generation. Again, that's how religion gets passed from generation to generation and doesn't get lost. So, if we can harness that and put that into businesses, those legacies are intensely successful.
Yeah, thank you for speaking into that because I think sometimes people can focus more on the differences than what we have in common. And when you spoke about the napkins, that's like such love in action in the details. Yeah.
Yeah.
How do we get so many top experts then to mentor for free? And I'm going to, obviously, I'm shifting from the private family business sector perhaps over to the public domain of those that maybe have worked at Fortune 100 or 500 companies or at public universities and so forth?
Well, I'm the CEO of the Mentor Project and one of the founders of it. And when we first started it, there were about 10 people. And people said no one is ever going to want to join this. We started with the one of the fathers of the firewall, one of the people who patented how we use credit cards on the internet, people who made big
Bill?
change. Yeah,
Oh, Tesla.
someone who also was the person who pushed the launch button for the mission to Mercury. She worked for NASA. We had high level individuals with us, and we just thought we were sort of just having fun, doing something to give back. And people said, no one will ever want to join you in this because people who hold important positions or high level positions are too busy. They're really focused on what they need to do. And they couldn't have been more wrong because within 6 months, we went from 10 to 60, then to 80, then to 100. We have an astronaut. We have a 6-time Nobel laureate nominee. We have top academics. We have the guy who discovered brown dwarf stars. We have, astrophysicists who study the moon. These people have all changed the world in some way. And we actually had to put a halt a little bit on how many we can take in because so many people contacted us to say, I want to mentor and give back. And when we found out why, I wrote the book, The Mentorship Edge, because so many people said, I want to feel relevant. Imagine you're getting ready to end your career and you feel like no one's interested in anything you ever did. And imagine that you want to feel useful, productive in a way that matters to you, that you're not just working. So a lot of these people still hold their jobs, but they still want to give back because it's a piece of them that goes out into the world. And so we really were able to see that people of all walks of life want to feel relevant, useful, and productive and helpful, and like their footprint matters. And that's why it works.
Yeah, I think it's lovely that to be needed and wanted. People need a reason to wake up, no matter the
Yeah,
success yesterday. Yes.
absolutely. You're right. It's the being needed and wanted. And I'll tell you a story about Bob Lefkowitz. I write about him in the book, but it's a fascinating story. He was a Nobel Prize winner from 2013 and or 12. I might have those dates wrong, but he was wondering, how did I become a Nobel Prize winner? How did this happen? So he decided to create the legacy tree for himself, where he has himself in the middle and he has his mentors that were above him and the people he mentored below him and all the people next to him. And he was able to map out who were the Nobel Prize winners. And there were a lot of them. And he did this. He decided he created it. He wrote about it, and he put it in a peer-reviewed journal for other academics. He went to a conference, and somebody came up to him and he said, "Hey, Bob, I'm 6 degrees Lefkowitz." And Bob said, "What do you mean?" And he said, "There are 5 people between you and me." And Bob said, "Well, tell me what you're up to." And he was absolutely astounded because this person was working on things that he had worked with, and he was able to see all the work he had done, how it progressed in the world, and hear all of the words that he had been speaking about through this person. And it was one of the most meaningful things to him to know that his legacy had already made it out 6 degrees. And who knows who else had received his information and knowledge and wisdom from work and research and taken it out. So I encourage everyone to create their own legacy tree, just like an ancestry.com tree.
Yeah, I think that's I think it's brilliant. And when somebody can take inventory, it just provides new perspective on
Yeah.
the work that they have done. And also, again, it's like that tie into humanity that we're
Yeah.
not as separate, especially when people are just staring at their blue screens these days. It
Yeah.
reminds us that, yes, we have these moments of connection, and here's the evidence. And so it doesn't get lost. Yes, especially since yesterday was Thanksgiving and we think about everything that we've been thankful for. So I want to shift for a moment before, again, we talk about the legacy bit that's personal to you. I want to bring up lateral mentorship versus hierarchical mentorship. And you spoke about the story of Steve and Steve. And I thought that was really interesting. So what is lateral versus hierarchical mentorship? And then will you share that story?
Sure. When we hear the word mentoring or mentor, we think of hierarchical. So I'm just making it I'm just distinguishing. So when most people say mentor, they're looking up to some nameless, faceless individual who's going to be their mentor, or they're looking to their mentor and seeing that person. So you're climbing a ladder when it's hierarchical, and it's usually work related. Not always, but it's usually. But the most impactful, the most world changing mentorship is lateral mentoring. It's a term I coined because I had been looking around, seeing all of this mentoring happening, but no one was acknowledging it. So the example that I give is, and again, lateral mentoring is you can look to your left or to your right, and you have a mentor that's there. We are always mentoring, and we just never realize it. So we don't get the benefits. We just do it without even acknowledging it or thinking about it. The person who receives the mentorship doesn't think about it in any way. So it's a lost sort of thing. If we can start to realize that we're engaging in it, we'll do it more often and then reap the benefits that are emotional attached to it. So Steve was a guy who was at work, and like everyone else, he had a boss who gave him an impossible task, and he had an impossibly short deadline to complete this task. So his boss says, "Hey, Steve, do you have this? This is really important to us. It's going to really mean a lot to our company. Can you do this?" And Steve says, "Yeah, I've got it. Don't worry." And so off his boss goes. Steve does some work. He makes a little progress, but not a lot. And the boss comes back and he says, "Steve, how's this coming along?" And Steve says, "I told you I got it." The boss leaves. Again, he comes back, not a lot of progress. And Steve's starting to sweat. And he's saying to himself, "I don't have this, but I'm certainly not telling my boss because my job is on the line here." So the boss leaves and he calls his friend Steve in a panic and he says, "Steve, I have this impossible task at work. I know the engineering up to this level. I know you know this other stuff that I don't know. Can you help me?" And Steve says, "I'll come after work and I'll help you out. Let's see if we can figure it out." So he drives over to after his work and he meets Steve. Everyone else is gone and they start working on it. And Steve's expertise is really helping Steve with the job that he has. And they make a ton of progress. The next day, the boss comes in. He was like, "Steve, I can't believe how much progress you made. This is great." And Steve said, "I told you I had it." Well, Steve calls Steve again, and Steve says, "I'll come over again." And it's like Rumpelstiltskin. They're weaving straw into gold every night while the boss is out and no one else is in the workplace. In fact, they're doing so well that day after day, the boss comes in and he's like, "This is great." And they finish the job early. And no one ever knows that Steve has been in the office helping, but the job got done. He was a success. It was terrific. That was Steve Jobs, who was at his workplace having struggles. And his friend who came to help him was Steve Wozniak. And the job where Steve was working was Atari. And the boss was Al Alcorn, who's the grandfather of video games. And the project was Breakout, the first video game. So this was something that changed the way that we do things and how we have video games. Atari is a name that we all know of now, but no one knew it at that time. And that's lateral mentoring. Most people say, "No, I just called a friend and they helped me." And I liken it to a hardware engineer and a software engineer calling the other person and saying, "Can you help teach me what you know so that I can continue what I'm doing and grow it?" We never do anything in a vacuum, ever. Nothing. The founding of the United States was based on a whole bunch of people who had different areas of expertise. They put it together. They created the country. Every single solitary big tech invention was done by multiple people who were all lateral mentoring. So our most impactful, powerful mentoring is lateral mentoring. And we all do this constantly, all day long, without even thinking about it. And if you can just say to yourself, I just mentored someone, or, "Oh, somebody just mentored me," it makes you do it more and it makes you appreciate it. And that's what's really important with it, because then you can get those meaningful connections. and those feelings that you matter in the world out there more.
Yeah, absolutely. I think when there can be that language to quote, name it, it becomes more real in our
Yes.
awareness. Yeah, yeah. Since this is a Design Your Legacy podcast, what does the word legacy mean personally to you?
Legacy to me means that we are carrying ourselves in a form of immortality forever. That we can live on in the values of those that we pass our values on to. We may never know the people that hold our values or our expertise or our knowledge, but legacy makes the world continue, and we are all a part of it, whether we're here physically or not.
Oh, that's lovely. I find it so interesting of all of the guests as well as clients. Rarely does anyone ever quote the definition from the dictionary of what legacy means personally to them. So thank you for that very awesome and deep, meaningful answer. In 1 to 2 sentences, what would you like your holistic legacy to be?
I would like my legacy to be that people really see themselves as a connected person in the world, that they're not alone, and that we are all intricately connected with each other in ways that we aren't even necessarily aware of, but that we are not alone, that we're connected with others all around the world, and that we all matter.
Lovely. If you were to think of the top 3 or 4 values or guiding principles that influence the design of your legacy, what might you say that they are?
I'd say mentorship, volunteering, and philanthropy. I try to engage in all of those, which are all a form of generativity.
Okay.
It makes me feel that.
Oh, very cool. Yeah, I would definitely add the value of generosity to that list in thinking about win-win scenarios. And again, after watching your TED Talk, which I recommend any of the viewers and listeners also check out, it's this idea that we are just bigger than a job title. We are bigger than our own silo when we are courageous enough to step on that stage or to think about that bigger, footprint or the fingerprints that we leave behind and that ripple effect.
Oh,
Yes.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes.
If you were to set aside a weekend or two a month to design a hardcover coffee table book of your personal legacy, what images or stories or lessons would fill its pages?
It'd be filled with all of the lateral mentoring pages of people who have changed somebody's life from the most small things to the most large things. I would definitely have in there all the grandmas who hold the power of so much more than we ever give them credit for, who pass on the values to their grandchildren, who then keep the culture and values of those family legacies going for generations, as well as all of the other lateral mentoring that occurs all the time from everyone.
Yeah, very cool, very cool. Is there any other thoughts that you would like to share when it comes to the bridge between mentorship and legacy, or even just the subject of legacy overall? Any closing thoughts?
I'd like to say that if you are engaging in generativity, you will most certainly be engaging in mentoring and leaving a legacy. Legacy is the output of generativity, it just automatically happens. So if you can engage in anything that has to do with generativity, but mentoring being the one that has you're generating a piece of yourself out into someone else, then you will be creating your own legacy. So I hope everybody starts to do that.
Beautiful. What's a good website if someone would like to learn more about your project, yourself, etc.?
Mentorproject.org is the mentor project, and deborahheiser.com is my personal website. You can find out a lot about mentoring from mentorproject.org.
Very cool. Before I read my closing paragraph, I just wanted to touch on some of the key points that you spoke about in the last half an hour or so. Just to do a recap, we started with this idea of, the intention we set for today's conversation, which was, what if we were built to give back so we don't burn down the libraries of our wisdom and values? And you spoke about this idea of the Ebenezer, the Scrooge influence, that we are meant to be more than just a silo in our world and in our lifetime, in this timeline that we show up here and now, that we do have this ability to reach out to other people. And it's not just about the money, no matter how successful we've become, that we have knowledge to share in our best practices, and to have that trust when it comes to vulnerability, to step outside of our comfort zone. And it can happen at any age, especially after age 50.
Oh, for sure.
So,
Absolutely.
so
You
thank
summed
you.
that up so beautifully.
Well, thank you for being a guest, and thank you for the value that you brought as a thought leader.
Thank you. It was a privilege and a pleasure being here with you today.
My pleasure. In closing, I'm Angelina Carleton, the hostess of the Design Your Legacy podcast, as well as the founder to Legacy Planning, a boutique advisory firm based out of Beverly Hills, California, USA, but international in those I coach and consult. I hope to dive deep into subjects that can help a person define, develop, and execute their legacy, and continue to scour the landscape for those who can be great resources to every dimension of your legacy. For many listeners and viewers, there can never be enough education and preparation in the moat or moat around your castle. Whether you find yourself with new wealth or generational wealth, may the content on this channel be an anchor in any storms ahead. If you're tuning in on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or SoundCloud, etc., please remember to rate and review, share with your family and friends. Thank you so much for joining us this week, and thank you to Deborah Heiser for speaking into your legacy.